Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. Today's topic of discussion is education. Now, in the conversation with education, I want to talk about the education that starts at home, which are the things, the life lessons that I'm really very proud that I've learned, that I would like to share with you so that you can keep them in your back pocket as you enter different situations and interactions that are going to have a definitive effect on your life, right? There are different people that you're going to meet in this life that your decisions in those conversations and your choices with these people, they can have a really serious impact on how you move forward. And I think that there are certain things that if we don't learn early, we learn too late, and we learn as a byproduct of these interactions not going well. And I think that it's just really important that we recognize that there are people in this world who don't have the best intentions for you, and I think the ones who have the worst intentions for you are the ones who are really good at hiding it. And that's not a lesson that we learn a lot early in life, and that's a lesson that I have only been able to protect myself against because of these key life lessons that I honed in on fairly early, that I would like to now impart as the way that I'm wrapping up my reflections, like the things that I'm really proud about for 2025. And so the first lesson that I would like to talk about is around alignment. And I think that it's really, really important that you recognize that if you are in the face of a certain degree of deception, if you are dealing with someone who is interested in having you believe a certain thing that isn't necessarily the truth, then it's very easy to fall into that trap if you're not first very clear in how much you trust yourself. And I think that this is such an important life lesson that we don't get early in life, but you have to learn to trust yourself before you start thinking about how you can trust other people. Because if you don't think about to what extent you trust yourself, and if you are in a situation where you do feel conflict, where you do feel a dissonance between what you're hearing and what you're feeling, when your intuition starts to kick up and give you signals that you're not quite sure on, if you don't have a certain degree of self-trust, then you're going to betray yourself by minimizing or downplaying some of the signals that are happening within you. And I've learned earlier in life, it was in my preteen years, where I really had that inner dialogue with myself around trust, around needing to trust myself and to make the kinds of choices that I knew were going to support myself, that I knew were going to be focused on preserving myself. I had to trust that I was able and capable of making those decisions, because I didn't feel at that point in my life that I could trust the adults around me to make the kinds of decisions that would support, protect, and empower me. So I had to trust myself with that ability. And when you recognize, when you hold yourself accountable to trusting yourself with the responsibility of keeping yourself safe in situations that may or may not be safe, like it's not necessarily easy to tell, then you approach interactions differently. There's a certain level of presence and awareness, because you're constantly trying to evaluate, do I feel safe in this situation? Like, do I feel comfortable in this situation or with this person? And those are the kinds of, I think, evaluative reflections that I had very early on in life. Like, I started doing that very early, where I would scan my environment. And I think it comes with being bullied. I think you develop this sixth sense where you're scanning your environment for threats, for danger, and to make sure that you feel safe. Over and above that, when I decided that I had to be accountable for my safety, and I was making decisions much more thoughtfully, much more intentionally, which means I was approaching every interaction with a lot more mindfulness. I was much more evaluative of the person's intentions beyond their words. And I think that a lot of us take people at face value, and I am someone who does not do that. I definitely think that there's always, for the majority of the people that I've interacted with, and for the majority of the people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis, there's a lot more than what needs to surface. Like, if you're not present in those conversations, if you're not practicing awareness, if you're not alert, there's a lot of things or subversive signals that you might miss. But even if you do catch them, if you don't have a sense of trust in your own intuition and your own critical thinking skills and in your own ability to decipher truth from falsity or reality from fiction, then you can really find yourself deceived. And I think that it's just so important that we recognize that all of us have the ability to say safeguard ourselves from being gaslit. And that's the one thing that I want to talk about. I think that it's just so important that we recognize when it is the case that our intuition is flaring up. And sometimes it can be super subtle, like super subtle signals. Sometimes it can be a shift that happens in a conversation, like everything feels good, everything's fine. And then at some point in the conversation, you feel this very subtle shift in the energy between you and that person. And you might not be able to put your finger on it, but then you start to feel like there's something about the way that this conversation is progressing that just doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel like something that you want to entertain or proceed with. But if you are undermining these signals that you have within yourself, then you can find yourself in a really sticky situation. And so I've learned that self-trust is so important when you're entering any social setting or navigating any sort of dynamic, that you have to just trust yourself. And I think that not a lot of us know to what extent we do trust ourselves, but I trust myself ultimately, right? So when it is the case that I have seen something, that I observe something, or that I'm reacting to something, or that I have a signal or an alarm, I recognize within myself that none of that is false, right? Like the way that my body responds, the way that I pick up on cues, the way that I pick up on alert, all of that I trust to be true. And I don't need to have it validated. I don't need a second opinion. I don't need to have people agree with me. I trust how I feel in that given situation. And I also trust the steps that I need to take to ensure safety moving forward. There's so much that science and the practice of science and the celebration of science takes away from our own human experience, because when we're so focused on the five senses and like gathering evidence, then we start to really minimize the value and significance of the meta awareness, right? So of things that are happening that are beyond sight, scent, smell, sound, and touch, that are still very, very real. And intuition gives us the ability to hone in on that. And so I think self-trust is so important, so that if you do feel a dissonance, if you do feel like there is a gap between what you're hearing and what you're experiencing, if your body is telling you that there is something awry, you will listen to your body and you will align accordingly. And that's an important life lesson that I learned even before 2025, but I'm so happy that that practice is super dialed in. I don't have any qualms about how I choose to respond or react with respect to my intuition, because my focus is on alignment. And I know that my intuition is about self-preservation. It's about protecting me, about making sure that I'm safe as it relates to the people, places, and situations that I find myself in. And so that's a really key lesson. And I think that everyone needs to understand that you need to trust yourself to be able to make sense of the cues, of the signals, and of the alerts that are going to come up that might not necessarily make sense right out of the gate, right? But if you are too focused in trying to make sense of it when you don't have enough information to really connect the dots, then you might put yourself in a situation where it now becomes like you're in too deep. And when you realize it is a trap, or when you realize this is a problem, like it's really very hard to pull yourself out of it. But if you trust your intuition, the moment that it becomes active and it's telling you there's something wrong, without needing to prove your intuition to be correct, then you can at that point in time mitigate and do whatever it is that you need to do to safeguard yourself from whatever might happen next. And so that's a great key lesson that I learned in 2025 that I'm so happy has definitely safeguarded me in situations and have kept me safe in situations my five senses wouldn't have been able to protect me from, because it was meta. It was much more about alignment, and alignment first begins with self-trust. Now, the second thing that I'm really happy that I learned in 2025, even before 2025, but something that I'm really wanting to celebrate this year, is owning my truth. And I think that it's just so important, because there's going to be a lot of people who have an issue with your truth if it keeps them from what it is they want. If you living in your truth, aligned to your truth, not deterred by some of the counters, some of the rebuttals, or some of the criticisms around your truth, if you are someone who feels confident within your truth, regardless of what's coming up against it, then there's no regrets or remorse that comes from that. And I think that I am where I am today, have survived the things that I have survived, because I trust my truth, right? And I think that it seems like such a small thing, but when we are in social settings where sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, or sometimes people would prefer that you water down your truth to make it more digestible, where some people would prefer that you silence your truth to make it so that they can feel comfortable doing their day-to-day. When all of those situations take place and you feel a lot of pressure to distort the truth to make it more palatable for the people around you, since 2020, since the pandemic, when I really started to think about some of the ugly truths that were taking place in my life, and like, what was I going to do as it relates to how I positioned myself in alignment with these truths, I recognized that like I had to take the truth for what it was, as bitter, as ugly, as hard as it was, and then I had to position myself accordingly, regardless of what anyone else thought. And I think that that part was just so hard, but the part of me that lived for other people's validation, that lived for other people's approval, that lived for other people's regard, that part of me had to die for me to have survived some of the extreme situations that I survived. And I think that it's really important that we recognize, like, if we have a truth and we recognize that that truth is uncomfortable and it's going to make waves and it's going to create friction, and people would prefer that you distort the truth or change the truth or silence that truth to make things easier for them, that's not a concession that you should ever feel comfortable making. I am so happy that I didn't make those concessions, and while not making those concessions created a lot of discomfort for me that I had to endure through, it built a lot of muscles in me, it built a lot of grit, resilience in me, because I knew that my truth was what it was, and I wasn't going to change it, to shift it, to make it smaller, to make it disappear, because there are people who have an issue with that truth being what it was. And I think that there are so many of us in our lives that we're going to encounter individuals who have a real problem with the truth that we carry, and who would prefer that that truth be buried, or prefer that that truth shifted and changed a little bit so that they could appear different than what they actually are. And I think that it's just a disservice to yourself to accommodate that. I think it's always going to be a disservice to you to change the truth from what it is. It's important that when we think about self-trust, when we think about alignment, that comes with truth. And I think that there's so many discussions that I could have around truth and absolute truth and subjective truth, and truth is very subject to interpretation, that it can be very relative, but there are certain things that are exactly as you describe them. They are exactly what your experience is, and it's not that 3 degree of separation where it's your truth, their truth, and somewhere in the middle. There are some things that are just the truth, right? And it can be, and it's what is beyond agenda, beyond personal gain. It can be, it's like, this is just what happened, this is just what it is. I need this truth to be spoken, I need this truth to be spread, I need this truth to be discussed out loud. And I think that when you have a lot of people coming against you because they are afraid of your truth, like, one of the things that will give you the key signal that someone is really afraid of your truth coming out is if they start to try to discredit you. Because if they realize that you're not going to play their game and you're not going to bend your truth, then what they need to do then is they need to discredit you as a truth teller, so that when you speak your truth, people are questioning you, right? And when we think about the principles of persuasion, one of the key principles that people mostly gravitate towards is ethos, which is character, which is people need to like you, they need to see you as trustworthy, and then that's all they need to believe the things that you're saying. So a lot of the times when people are afraid of the truth, what they first do is they completely try to assassinate your character, because they know that the first thing that people will use as a measuring stick for whether or not they align to you is like how they perceive your character to be. And so when you find yourself in a situation where your character is coming under attack, where you're being discredited, where you're being maligned, where you're being smeared, where, you know, everything about you is being picked apart without any basis for it, then recognize it is because of the weight that your truth carries. And that means that you have a significant responsibility to protect that truth, to safeguard that truth, and to speak that truth out loud, especially when you feel that level of the sun coming up against you. And it can be really frightening, and I've had moments where I felt just so overwhelmed with all of the things that were taking place to discredit me as a person who had this truth to carry. But I recognize that if I gave myself the opportunity to endure, if I endured those difficult situations and stages and phases in my life, and I protected and safeguarded this truth, then I can hold the people who are players of this truth, but on the wrong side of the truth, accountable. But if I allow them to win by playing dirty, by trying to assassinate my character, by trying to discredit me, but if I allowed myself to succumb to that, or to allow that to be a deterrent, then they would win in the lies, right? And I think so many of us are surviving the lies of the people who were able to successfully silence the truth with the deceptions that they had. And I think that needs to be a trend that changes, but it comes with perseverance, with endurance, and with resilience, and recognize that in that war where someone is trying to discredit you because your truth carries a lot of weight, like, you're going to lose a lot of goal. And I think that's the third lesson that I'm happy to share in 2025, is that there are going to be situations in your life that are going to be signals to you that it's a goodbye. It's a goodbye to a specific chapter that involves people, places, and situations that you loved, hold dear, that you cared about, that you thought would, be part of your life for a long period of time. But it's the choices that that you need to make to protect the truth that it is that you're carrying that create the divide. And sometimes those divides are absolutely necessary, and it's okay to break away from people who are going to make it hard for you to protect the truth that you carry, whether they mean to make it hard for you or not. Not everyone is going to hurt you intentionally. Some people are just caught in the crossfires, but if they are caught in the crossfires, if it is the case that their struggle with trying to understand who you are in the face of the character assassination and the smear campaigns, and they're kind of making it muddier than it needs to be, then it's okay to say goodbye in those situations. And I have made a lot of sacrifices to protect the truth that I carry, and I'm just so happy now, even though like it's come with its own fair share of consequences, of struggles, of outcomes that I'm still wading through. But I'm just so happy. I'm happy that this is the outcome of me aligning to my truth, staying aligned to myself, and practicing self-trust. My intuition does not steer me wrong ever. I know who I am regardless of what anyone else is saying about me, and knowing who I am is what has gotten me through some of the most difficult, challenging situations in my life, and staying aligned to my values, especially in the worst times. And I think that sometimes we give ourselves permission to be less than what we know we are because of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, whereas I find that when things get really tough, it's my opportunity to prove to myself that I am who I say that I am when things are easy. And I take that as a personal challenge. I take it very seriously, that when things are very difficult, that is an opportunity for me to prove to myself that I am who I say that I am, because it's important for me to integrate the things that I say that I am with the actions that I take, whether people are watching or not. And I think that that level of integration, that enables so much healing, right? Because sometimes we strive to be these things that we know are beyond where we are right now, and we know that we're hurting, we know that there are things that have taken place in our lives that make it hard for us to be the people that we know we could be. But then a challenge happens, and in that challenge you could either fold and become less than who you know you are, you could rise to the occasion regardless of how difficult it is. And I am who I am, strong in the person that I am, standing strong in the truth that I carry, because I gave myself the opportunity to rise to the challenge when life called me to. Like when life got really, really difficult, I stayed aligned to who I was, regardless of the sacrifices that created, regardless of the ways that hurt, regardless of the loss that created, regardless of the grief that tumbled in. I was okay with that. And what you recognize is this, like no matter how hard the days can be, and some days can be super, super hard, if you wake up the next day, it's an opportunity to start fresh. And your life isn't the past. Like there are people in the past that we can grieve, that we can feel sad that we don't have connection to. But our life is this present moment right now. And I think that it's just so important that we recognize that when we say things like the past does not exist, the future is uncertain, but the present is here and now. And I think that when I really started to make that my mindset, my mentality, it means like if there are parts of my past that are no longer part of my reality, then the part of me that longs for that past like needs to also go, because that past doesn't exist anymore, right? And so if there are parts of me that are holding on to a version of reality that is no longer a reflection of my present, then that part of me needs to go if it makes my present more difficult than it needs to be, because I'm not the human who wants to live in the past. I'm the human who wants to live in the present. And in living in the present, I can practice honing in on my intuition. I can practice being really very mindful and intentional with the choices and the decisions that I make to ensure that alignment persists and that my integrity is never shaken in the choices and the decisions that I'm making, because my focus is on the present and I'm creating a future that I feel like is a reflection of my present intentions right now. And so that's some of the reflection I'm having. I think the videos that we're going to have as the year closes off are a little bit more existential. And I think it's important to have these existential conversations out loud so that our reflections based on our experiences can maybe inform how you respond and react to the experiences that are yet to come, right? Because I think that the one beautiful thing about having a community that is global, different ages, different stages and phases, it gives us an opportunity to learn from each other's experiences. And that's why I want to have this channel, to teach you, to provide information that I feel will enable you to focus on your own self-discovery journey, to focus on self-actualization, to enable you to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be, which needs to be someone who's informed, who can think critically, and who can safeguard themselves from difficulty and from harm where needed. Not to say that you can keep those things from happening, but you can safeguard yourself in that you don't need it to be, that you can keep it from being worse than what it needs to be. And that's why I want to have these conversations. I think this is so important that we cultivate community around these things, and we give ourselves, each other, the opportunity to cultivate skills around self-mastery in this way. In any case, that was a conversation I wanted to have today. I think those are the things that I really want you to think about. I would love to hear how you have put together some of the things that you're really proud of yourself over the last year, some of the lessons that you've honed in and that become like part of your value system that you are really very proud of. I think this is the right time of the year to talk about those things. We can be grateful about the things around us, but sometimes it's like a huge oversight. We're not grateful about the things that are blooming within us, right? The qualities, the characteristics, the traits that are blooming within us because of how we respond to the situation, circumstances that we find ourselves in. So that's what I want to come in here to do. I want to celebrate some of the things that I find have bloomed within me, within like the darkest times of my life, that like now that things aren't so dark, like things are even keel, like I'm just so happy that these characteristics have been built in me, because it gives me the strength to be able to stand alone in cases where I feel like in this situation I need to stand alone, but it also gives me the confidence to behave in a way that I feel like aligns to my truth and aligns to my ability to preserve and protect and to safeguard myself as well. And if I can do that for myself, then I can definitely do that for the people around me, and hopefully give you the courage or the motivation and the encouragement, the inspiration to do so yourself. In any case, that was the topic for today, since food for thought for you. Now, if I have piqued your interest, it's important that you know that we do host live events at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our website. So definitely be sure to check that out. Now, these events are paid events, so if you do see yourself participating in our community on an ongoing basis, then I do suggest that you take a look at one of our package plans. Yes, we do offer package plans over and above our live events, as well as access to webinars and workshops largely focused on self-mastery over and above these events. So check that out. Be part of our game changer community, being part of the change that you want to see, allowing us a small role to play in your journey. And we also do provide leadership development courses for children. Now, this is the first of its kind online, digital, virtual, continuous learning that focuses on cultivating the critical thinking and the intellectual development to make the kinds of decisions that will create leaders for tomorrow. And so our core concept is the core philosophy for us in cultivating leadership quotient settles on cultivating 4 key competencies, and that's cultivating a sense of autonomy, a sense of self-efficacy, compassion, as well as self-concept, having a strong sense of self-identity. So if you have a family member that you feel would benefit from these leadership development classes, they're parent-child workshops that, again, are virtual. You can complete them at your own pace. Check those out on our website as well. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and we'll chat again very soon.